Hi Ian, we're now live.
Welcome to the first Tuesday business webinar. Today we're going to take a look at 3 lessons that Apple learned to become a $3 trillion company. It's quite a hard thing to say, it's so many zeros. The webinar content is going to be looking at 3 lessons. Lesson 1, leveraging brand emotion, or the symbolic connection between brands and their consumers. Lesson 2, understanding consumer needs and wants, and how macro environmental situations impact those consumer needs and wants. And lesson 3, exploring how innovation and marketing are key to organizations that want to grow their market share, their market revenue, and ultimately their market profitability. So lesson 1, Apple understands the emotional connection between consumers and what the Apple brand means to them. Apple always had a very close connection, even when it was just a personal computer brand in the 80s and 90s, with their consumers. And what that means is that they understood why and what benefits the consumers sought from purchasing Apple products. And that was by accident. They identified that graphic designers and people who worked in creative industries liked the interface. And that was when they started listening to the market for the first time. Now, obviously, through the 90s, they almost became bankrupt on several occasions, and at many times were clinging on by their fingernails. By the turn of the century, that changed. What they realized was that the emotional connection between their organization and their consumers could be leveraged to create brand love. So they understand what they need to say to their audiences, how they need to say it, when best to communicate it, and most importantly, the audience's response to that message. So they are so sophisticated that they understand that if they frame communications in a certain way, the vast majority of their audiences will decode those messages in the manner that Apple intended. And that sounds like a simple thing to do. Unfortunately, it's not. So in September this year, they launched the Fitness Plus app. And we're just going to take a quick look at the messaging that they use for Fitness Plus. I've just realized you can't see this, so I'm going to try and swap to it. Okay, so what we can see is that Apple have positioned that product to many different audiences. And they've done that because over time they've recognized that there are certain ways in which their audiences will respond and certain imagery that they provide that resonates with their audience. Now, for Apple, what they're doing is they're jumping onto another craze. They're jumping onto the sort of Peloton craze for online fitness services, 24/7, 365, with a full ecosystem of services that support such an activity. Music, for example, phone devices, you get the idea, okay? So they position this in such a way that, oops, that shouldn't have happened. So they position this in such a way that they're able to resonate with their audiences, with their fanboys and their fangirls. So I've got a question for you. Given that this year is different, and it's different because of the pandemic and the macro environmental impacts that's had, if you are Apple, how would you promote your brand? Well, it seems to me by looking at Apple's communications from that launch event in September that they're pretty much doing the same thing. And that probably works for Apple, but would it work for every organization? Probably not, and I think you'll see the evidence for that soon. So September is the time when most brands buy media, produce Christmas ads, plan campaigns, formulate the goals. The Q4 of any financial year is when most organizations make their maximum revenues and profits, so this Christmas season. So back in August or September, they've got to buy the media, produce the Christmas ads, plan their campaigns to be delivered from mid-November onwards. So if we take a look at the diagram, what we can see is the red bars are iPhone sales, and you can see the spikes. And those spikes are associated with Q4. And those spikes are quite significant. So Apple sold $90 billion of product in Q4 of 2018, and probably just shy of $80 billion of product in 2019. And we can see also that that orange bar is their services. And you can see that 10 years ago, their services weren't generating great deals of profit, but now their services are probably contributing 11 or $12 billion a quarter to their annual return. So they are adopting technology hardware, but they're supporting it with services. And we'll come back to that soon. If we think about most companies, and especially retail companies, the Christmas period is when they go into the black, hence Black Friday. They move from the red, making a loss, into the black in the last weekend of November. Often 50 to 80% of yearly revenue is generated during this time. So the question I've got, if you're Apple, if you're any other company, is how might typical brand activity resonate during Christmas 2020? You've had to decide this in August and September, and you'll know just from the transition from September to October in the United Kingdom that the pandemic is fundamentally altering people's perceptions of life at this minute. But they've got to do this in advance. So will consumers spend as much money? Will they spend money on the same things as typical? And Ritson says, instead, as with so many branding challenges, a good marketer will reflect with introspection upon the environment, roam wide with ethnography, that's analysing human interactions with objects, and dig deep with cultural analysis to determine just what their mood target consumers will be in when December arrives. And that's a pretty difficult thing to do. So Apple have got it slightly easier because even in the pandemic, sales of their devices and their services have been very solid. But for just about every other non-technology environment, it's a particular challenge. So let's practice with something a little more simple. And in this case, and we're going to have a little poll on this soon, this is an advert from John Lewis. Now, John Lewis, when it comes to retail, are the preeminent brand when it comes to Christmas communications. Their communications are associated with Christmas.
I don't fight this feeling any longer, and yet I'm still afraid to let it flow. What started out as friendship has grown stronger.
So John Lewis is a retail store. It sells products, mostly some services, some banking, insurance products. What does that advert got to do with selling products or services? Well, obviously nothing. It's to try and create an emotional bond between the brand, John Lewis, and the consumer. And the whole focus of this is togetherness and belonging and happiness. And this advert was planned during the sort of late summer of 2019 when the Brexit situation was at its peak and this fragmentation of Britain in the context of Europe. And they were just trying to reassure consumers about the inclusivity and togetherness and loving environment that John Lewis provides as part of their symbolic offer. So what would you do? I'm just going to share a link with you, and you've got 15 seconds or so to have a look. Okay, so the responses are starting to trickle through. And we can see that people are just saying, give me some dark humour, and is there some fun to be had? And we've now gone with an option for 4 as well. So there's a lag on this, so I apologise that it's not absolutely in sync with what we're seeing. So we've seen the results, and if we revisit the Ritson quote, they would say, well, cultural analysis and ethnography are the answer. Well, what you started doing by answering that simple question is a form of cultural analysis. And you've identified that there are different ways in which you would want that particular situation delivered. So each brand and product portfolio will be different, and therefore it's necessary for organizations, including Apple, to undertake research, focus groups, interviews, quantitative analysis, to be able to understand the motivation, the perception, the attitude, and the behavioral intention of their audiences. And we're going to come into this motivation, perception, attitude, and behavioral attention in the next section of this presentation. So we need to understand this, but it changes, and it changes quite quickly, and it's impacted by macro-environmental impacts, pandemics, Brexit, economy, or just sunny weather, believe it or not. So we cover this sort of stuff in the video lecture series for business studies. There's a link there if you want to click on that link. I can distribute this presentation after this webinar, and you'll be able to get lots more information on brand activation, which is kind of what we're discussing in that area. So when we consider consumer behavior, it's normally explored through types classifications of consumer goods, consumer lifestyles, buying behaviors, understanding customers, and then to do what Apple's done and shown it's done by optimizing customers to maximize their expenditure with that organization. So lesson 2, Apple has spent decades learning to understand perception, motivation, attitude formation, and behavior, and how they can be used to differentiate Apple brands. So when we thought about this, if this is a little bit further on in the Fitness Plus launch video, we can see that there are different exercises, different classes, different types of socioeconomic groups they're in, and they're basically trying to position their product to the widest possible audience that resonate with them. But predicting what consumers will do is very difficult. If you know what a BlackBerry mobile phone is, just pop what a BlackBerry is in the chat box. Because BlackBerry was very, very popular with adolescents and teenagers, 16 to 24-year-olds, less than 8 years ago. And that's what a BlackBerry is. They used to be known as crackberries because they were so popular. And basically, it's a simplified smartphone with a QWERTY keyboard and a small screen. And you might be thinking, why was that popular when the iPhone 2 existed and when Android devices existed, which were more than usable? But 8 years ago, people your age couldn't get enough of these. And the answer was simple. It was BlackBerry messaging, BBMS. And what happened was that parents were typically buying contracts for their children, and they would have 5,000 text messages. Within a week or so of the month, the 5,000 text messages would have been exhausted, and more would have to be purchased. And people of the younger generation were getting a lot of earache from parents saying, how the hell could you use 5,000 messages in a month, let alone a week? And basically, adolescents and teenagers formed a positive attitude towards BBMS, BlackBerry messaging services. It allowed them to message securely and within the environment. So as soon as enough people started using this, it became self-fulfilling. Well, it did until about 2012, 2013. And by 2013, Facebook had a decent messaging system, and other messaging systems were then available. So all of a sudden, people weren't straddled with a suboptimal smartphone. Okay, so if we think about consumers and how they think about society and how they think about consumption, this was a chart done by McKinsey on the week of the 30th of March 2020. And normally optimistic and pessimistic would be about 45-45 with 10% unsure. But we can see here that unsure and pessimistic is best part of 83%, 84%. Obviously, it doesn't add up to 100. Unsure or pessimistic. This to me as a marketer is making me question whether I should be undertaking marketing activities, because I really want to be marketing towards an optimistic audience, not a pessimistic audience. This is opinion, and basically at the same time, 30th of March, gym and fitness, fashion and beauty and automotive, consumers didn't want to hear from brands in those categories, those sectors. But they did want to hear from categories in healthcare, pharma, for supermarkets and food or drink. So we can see that the macro environmental impact of the pandemic is fundamentally shifting the attention of the consumer. So consumers are capricious, fickle, changeable, fitful, disloyal. You could keep on going on and on. And the only reason that we know this as organizations is we have to keep on monitoring how they feel. Because if I'm a fashion and beauty brand, then that evidence is telling me that I should pull my planned advertising because my audiences don't want to hear. Why? Well, why would they want to buy fashion or beauty items when they're stuck in the house and they can't actually go out? So let's practice with a simpler example again. Let's practice with Primark. So this is the second poll. This one's a bit easier than the first poll. But if you click on the link that's in the chat box for the first poll and see what you would do if you were responsible for marketing, and we'll see what the audience says. Okay, now they're flowing in, and we can see that there's a change, a variance, but I'd say almost 50% of the audience is saying reduce all marketing expenditure. So let's take a look at Primark in a little bit more detail. Primark normally generates £650 million worth of sales revenue per month. So for the 3 months that they were locked down in the United Kingdom, they missed $2 billion worth of revenue. Typically, last year, Primark made £913 million profit. This year, they're anticipating $300 million to $350 million. But if you look at that last paragraph, Primark's like-for-like sales in the UK since reopening are expected to be 12% lower than the same period last year. And that's true. Between April and June in 2020, people who earned a living saved 30% of their incomes. That's very different to the normal 7% that they save. In August, it had dropped to 10%, but they were still saving more money than typical. So the results said that pretty much there's no correct answer. Again, it depends on your organization and the markets that you're addressing. But in your position, I think I would accept that lost revenue is lost revenue. I think I would accept that Primark can't switch to online delivery effectively or quickly because its distribution is very traditional. Hence, my recommendation as a marketing professional would be to save money, option one, so I can spend it to gain market share later. And strangely enough, I would click this link, but it means I'll have to go out of this presentation. That's what ITV saw. All the ITV basically is funded by adverts, and they saw a 43% drop in revenue for adverts between April and June 2020. And in July, there was a 23% drop year on year. So basically, they knew that there was no point. The organizations that were using ITV companies to advertise, to promote, just said, no, we're pulling our horns in. So lesson 3, we're going to spend a bit more time here. Apple knows that innovation and marketing are key to its success. And it knew this during the Mac years. They were really innovative with the user interface and with the way that applications worked. And when they started going after the consumer electronics market, the iPod market, MP3s were growing like topsy, 1999, 2000, 2001. What they said was, okay, we'll introduce an iTunes environment. It was introduced for the Mac, failed dismally in January 2001. It was then ported to iPod, which was launched in September, October 2001, and became very, very successful. By 2006, iPod owned 72% market share for MP3 players. But more importantly, Apple was making a great deal of money from its iTunes store, where it charged 30% of the cost, the selling price of every track to the music industry. So if I had a new album or single I wanted to promote, I could promote it through iTunes, but iTunes, Apple, would take 30% of £1.49 or 99p, depending on how much it was selling for. And Apple innovated with their MP3 market. They started off with the Classic, they went to the Mini transformed into the Nano, the Shuffle came upon, the Touch, and now they've only got one MP3 player left. That's unsurprising because most people now consume streamed music through mobile phones or other devices. And Apple kind of knew what was happening to the market, so the industry was changing, and the market life cycle of that industry was also changing. And they recognized that they needed to move away from MP3s, the iTunes store, and they needed to move into streaming music to be competitive with Spotify, which was leading to a significant decrease in the revenue being generated. So they bought Beats in 2014 for $3 billion, but they didn't buy Beats for its headphones. Okay? They bought Beats for the Beats music system, which they launched as Apple Music in 2015, and here's why. Okay, that's a market life cycle. In this case, it's actually for a product, iTunes song downloads, and you can see that by 2010, 2009, 2010 was a world recession. 11, 12, the growth wasn't quite so great, but by 2013, they knew exactly where the market was going. And they still make considerable amounts of money, about $2 billion a year from iTunes song downloads. But they could see that their market share was dwindling, and then the consumption of iTunes is not so great. So they moved into streaming services. They've got about 50 million Apple Music subscribers now, and they're now generating, well, you do the sums, 50 million times 5 or 10 pounds or dollars per month for each of those. They followed this idea of an ecosystem, a service delivery, iTunes, into the iPhone, and they created an App Store. And the App Store has been fundamental to the success of iPhone. Whatever I want to use my iPhone for, there's an app that allows me to provide that. But they charge developers 30% of the selling price of every app on the App Store. And more recently, in September 2020, they introduced the bundling of Apple services into ecosystem offers. They've taken a look at Amazon. Amazon do this fantastically. And there's a seminar on Amazon next month. But Amazon do this wonderfully, and they bundle services together to increase the amount of money that you pay to them on an annual basis. And Apple have been good at this. And by bundling iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV, and Apple Arcade, they're going to get an additional £360 minimum a year off a typical consumer. So at the minute, I am an iCloud consumer. It costs me 79 pence a month. So about £10 a year they get from me for iCloud. But I don't use Apple Music, I don't use Apple TV. So they're not going to be able to bundle me. But my son uses Apple TV, uses Apple Arcade, uses Apple Music. Guess what he's having for his birthday? So what we're talking about here is sort of management decision-making, marketing, management decision-making. So typically this is explored by considering sale volumes, market size, growth, market share, and how data and technology helps organizations. So again, Apple's a difficult thing to consider, but if you look on the bottom right there, hopefully all of you know what a Cadbury's cream egg is. If you don't, you can see an image of it. It's a confectionery product. And if you were a product manager for Cadbury's and you were tasked with growing market share and improving revenue and maximizing profit, what might you do with innovation and marketing to facilitate that? Well, they took a cue from the classic Easter egg hunt. And this is a picture on the top right-hand side from Jiangsu in China from 1934, where people are actually hunting for Easter eggs. And they've done this for several years. And it's been quite successful, apart from the fact that sales to 16 to 34-year-olds have slipped. It doesn't really, that age group doesn't really respond to usual promotion. The product's only on sale from the first week or so of January through to the Easter period. And whilst the cream hunt has been successful, 16 to 34-year-olds respond to brand engagement. They want to be engaged with the brands that they purchase. They don't just want to be talked to. So what might you do as a marketer? So your responsibility is to improve market size, grow sales volumes, increase market revenue share, and use data and technology to leverage some of the above. So what we're going to do is swap the screen out again. Hopefully there is a form in the chat box. And this is another easy one. There we go. Somebody's in really quickly. Oh, this is interesting.
Hi, Ian. Sorry to interrupt. We can't see your screen presently.
Thank you very much. I knew I'd forgotten to do something. Hopefully you can see my screen now. So what we've got is we've got some responses in. Some people have said change the promotional activity. Some people have said innovate the current campaign. Currently, is anybody? Yeah, one person said spend more money digitally. Okay, so let's make sure I don't make the same mistake again. So this is what they normally did. They worked with partners and they would do sort of like physical marketing. Now you can see why this doesn't resonate with 16 to 34-year-olds. This to me is something that's targeted at young families, especially children of young families, and it's an association with the National Trust. So this is an example of the typical marketing activity. What they decided to do is, because they'd worked with partners before successfully, is they decided to partner with Google, Tesco, Lionsgate, Benefit. And if you don't know who LVMH are, please look it up in your own time and have a look at the brands managed by LVMH. And what they said is, look, if you partner with us, we'll improve your brand communications and we'll improve the perception and attitude of your audiences to your adverts. To do this, marketing needed to tell the audience what they needed to do, inform them of how they could hunt for the eggs. Cadbury then hid the eggs in partner adverts, and we'll see examples of this. And then Cadbury would post clues across social media, partner with Mail Online and other traditional media outlets to say where people could look for these adverts and obviously win a prize if they found them and if they tagged it. So innovation again, take a picture, send it to a web address or to a QR code, and the marketing they used out of home, not but out of home marketing, which they leveraged in the high footfall areas. And what I hope you can see is that this is an example. So the first part is it's white cream egg hunting season. The right-hand panel is instructing you what you should do. And then what's really key here is you now spend much more time, it's called dwell time, you spend much more time on the Honda advert. So Honda's benefiting because normally you wouldn't be looking at this advert. And if you're a 16 to 34-year-old, you might be interested in buying a Honda Civic because it's the type of car, not for a 16-year-old, but certainly for a 25 to 34-year-old. And when you're looking at this advert, basically you may have identified, but if you can see my mouse, which I hope you can, it's in the passenger side fog light at the bottom of that ad. And now I have to take a picture of it, and I have to send that picture to huntthewhitecreamegg.com. Okay? So let's have a look at some of the results. Dwell time on partner ads was up to 10 times greater than typical. Why? Because people are actually engaged with a game trying to find an Easter egg. Perception and awareness for Cadbury's cream egg improved. The adverts were viewed rather than ignored. When they looked at the adverts that were being delivered on YouTube, 44% of the visitors were viewing through. What does that mean? It means they started the advert, they completed the advert because they were waiting to find the cream egg. That compares with 10% normally. So the awareness and what we call elaboration was much greater. Here's the key point. Sales increased by 45% compared with 2018. In revenue terms, £20 million extra in the UK alone. Typical profit margin for chocolate confectionery products is 7.5%. Cream eggs have a much higher profit margin. It's a much smaller product. You pay a lot more for a lot less product. So at least £1.5 million extra profit. So the question is, do you think it works? So what we see there, in the same way that innovation and marketing can be used to define products, we can also use innovation and marketing to change the way we communicate with our audiences and to improve the perception, the awareness, the attitude, the motivation, and the behavioral intention of our consumer audiences. Yes, it worked. Anything that's generating £20 million of extra revenue in 1 year is working. Okay, a little bit about Aberystwyth Business School. What we try to do is we try to deliver practitioner graduate experts. 97% of our graduates are in employment within 6 months of leaving. The content of this webinar was chosen to highlight 3 modules from a marketing degree, okay, applied brand management, consumer and buyer behavior, and marketing management. And here they are. If you search courses.aber.ac.uk, you will see these. Alongside in the second year, you would look at relationships, customer experience, and you'd also look at research methods. And you'd have one other option. So that's the N500 marketing single honours degree. We offer digital marketing as a degree. I'm a specialist in digital marketing. And we also offer joint honours with psychology, with business and management, with tourism management, and with accounting and finance. A little bit about the business school. The university itself is top ranked in England and Wales for your overall student satisfaction. And marketing is the second highest student satisfaction and student experience score in the United Kingdom, as measured by the government, the NSS, Mori Ipsos file. That means that students of the business school and the marketing function are more highly ranked than Oxford, Cambridge, Exeter, Durham, Bristol, Cardiff. We deliver very, very high student satisfaction. So that brings this particular seminar to an end. Next time, we're going to take a look at Amazon. And we're going to look at Rise of the Machines and how Amazon's robot revolution destroyed its competition. It will be on the first Tuesday in November at 12:15. Hopefully, I will see you there. And I will leave you with just a few images of Aberystwyth and the traditional university, which has been here since 1872, that we are. In the meantime, we'll swap back to the chat box. And if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to answer those in the chat box now. Okay, as we've got a bit of time, and just in case we wait for those questions to come in, let's take a look at some of those form outcomes now that people have had time to finish, and we can work through them. So hopefully you can see these. Run over a bit of time, but for the question 1, yes, most of you said, is there some fun to be had? For that audience, I completely agree with you. Just think about what would happen if I was targeting a not so young audience, if I was targeting people my age or targeting people my parents' age. You know, we're talking mid to late 80s, and how that would change. So that's one of the things that you need to consider. With regards to the marketing for Primark, yeah, I think I tend to agree with your decisions. There's no right answer there, as I've said, so it all relates. And the final one, with regards to spend more money digitally, change the promotional activity, innovate the current campaign, Cadbury's actually did all 3 of those. So it was a really nasty question to ask you because you're all right. I think we've got, 17 answers there, but fundamentally, you're all correct on that area. So I think if I switch back to I don't think we've got any further questions, so all I'll say is thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next month.